The Concrete Oasis, Arcosanti 1971. Chapter 1, The Threshold of Tomorrow. Welcome to Synapse Daily. Today, we step onto a specific patch of dirt. It is 1971. We are in the high Arizona desert. The sun is a heavy, golden weight. The wind carries the scent of dry sage. Below us, the Agua Fria River flows quietly. But ahead of us, the horizon breaks. Usually, the desert is a flat, horizontal line. But here, something vertical is rising. Something alien yet deeply ancient. This is Arcosanti. Phase 1 is finally complete. For the first time, the dream has walls. It has a roof. It has a pulse. In 1971, the world was in chaos. Vietnam was raging. The energy crisis was looming. Cities were choking on smog and traffic. Amidst this, a small group of rebels stayed. They didn't go to Woodstock. They didn't join the suburban sprawl. They came here to build a prototype. A prototype for the end of the world as we knew it. Imagine standing on that mesa. You see massive concrete half-domes. They look like prehistoric cathedrals. You hear the rhythmic clink of hammers. You smell the wet, metallic scent of curing concrete. This wasn't just a construction project. It was an act of biological necessity. Today, we ask, why did they choose this? Why did they think 1971 was the year to change everything? Chapter 2, The Prophet of the Mesa. To understand Arcosanti, we must study Paolo Soleri. He was a man of two worlds. He was born in Turin, Italy. He was raised among the dense, walkable European plazas. Then, he moved to the American West. He studied under the titan, Frank Lloyd Wright. Wright wanted every American to have an acre. He wanted a car in every garage. He dreamed of Broadacre City. But Soleri saw a fatal flaw. He saw that sprawl was a slow death. He saw the horizontal plague of the suburbs. To Soleri, the car was a mechanical parasite. It ate the land and isolated the soul. He broke away from his master. He retreated to the desert to think. He developed a new philosophy, Arcology. This word is a fusion. Architecture and ecology. He believed a city should be a living organism. It should be three-dimensional. It should be dense, complex, and miniature. By 1971, his sketches were world-famous. They were beautiful, sprawling megastructures. Critics called them utopian fantasies. Soleri hated that word. He wasn't a dreamer. He was a builder. He decided to prove the critics wrong. He would build the first urban laboratory. He would build Arcosanti. He started with nothing but a few volunteers and a radical idea. 1971 was the moment the world had to stop laughing. The first phase was real. Chapter 3, Silt-Casting, The Alchemy of Earth. How do you build a city with no money? You use the earth itself. The completion of Phase 1 in 1971 was a technical miracle. They didn't use massive industrial cranes. They used silt casting. This process was pure architectural alchemy. First, the volunteers would pile the desert soil. They shaped it into massive, rounded mounds. These were the molds for the buildings. Then, Soleri himself would walk onto the mounds. He would carve intricate, geometric patterns into the dirt. He was sculpting the ceiling from the ground up. Next, they poured concrete over the silt. They added pigments, deep oranges, scorched reds, and desert ochres. The concrete soaked up the patterns of the earth. Once it cured, the miracle happened. They brought in backhoes and shovels. They dug the dirt out from underneath the concrete. What remained was a thin shell dome. It was light. It was strong. It was beautiful. In 1971, the ceramic apse stood tall. It was the first social heart of the city. When you look up at those ceilings today, you see the fingerprints of the 1971 volunteers. You see the texture of the Arizona soil. It is a building that literally grew out of the ground. It was the most sustainable construction method on the planet. And they did it with nothing but sweat and silt. Chapter 4: The Geometry of Human Connection. Phase 1 changed the rules of human interaction. In 1971, the American city was being ripped apart. Highways were cutting through neighborhoods. The front porch was being replaced by the backyard fence. Soleri wanted to reverse this. The layout of Arcosanti was a rejection of the car. There were no roads inside the city. There were only paths. There were stairs. There were bridges between living spaces and workshops. The distance from your bedroom to your job was measured in seconds. Soleri believed in the urban effect. This is the idea that when people are forced into close proximity, creativity explodes. In Phase 1, the residential units were built directly into the structures. You didn't just live in Arcosanti, you were part of the machine. Think about the psychology of that space. You couldn't hide in a car. You had to look your neighbor in the eye. You shared the sunset from the same concrete ledge. This was miniaturization in action. By making the city smaller, Soleri made the human experience bigger. But was it too much? Could a modern human handle that much intimacy? In 1971, the first residents were finding out. They were living in a three-dimensional puzzle. They were the first arcologists. They were the pioneers of a new way to be human. And the world was watching with a mix of awe and terror. Chapter 5: The Urban Microchip, Evolution by Design. By 1971, the world was obsessed with more. More land. More highway miles. More horsepower. But Paolo Soleri was obsessed with less. Specifically, he was obsessed with the concept of complexity-miniaturization. To Soleri, this wasn't just an architectural whim, it was a law of the universe. Look at the history of matter. In the early universe, vast clouds of hydrogen stretched across light years. Simple. Massive. Empty. But as evolution progressed, matter began to shrink and densify. A single human cell is infinitely more complex than a nebula, yet it is microscopic. Soleri argued that for human society to reach its next evolutionary stage, our cities had to do the same. Phase 1 was the first physical chip of this urban microprocessor. In Arcosanti, the wiring was the people. By placing living quarters, studios, and communal kitchens within a few hundred feet of each other, Soleri was trying to short-circuit the waste of the modern world. He believed that density breeds intelligence. If you are close to your neighbors, you share ideas. If you are close to your work, you share energy. In 1971, this was the vertical hope. While Phoenix was spreading out like a slow-moving ink blot, Arcosanti was reaching upward, trying to condense the human spirit into a diamond. Chapter 6: The Bronze Heartbeat, the Foundry and the Bells. If you walk through the concrete corridors of the 1971 milestone today, you will hear a sound that defines the site. It is the rhythmic, metallic clink of the bell foundry. To fund this massive experiment, Arcosanti had to become a merchant city. It had to create something the world wanted. The foundry apps, completed in Phase 1, became the economic engine. Here, the volunteers weren't just pouring buildings, they were pouring fire. They used the same silt-casting techniques to create the world-famous Arcosanti bells. Molten bronze, heated to over 2,000 degrees, was poured into hand-carved sand molds. This was artisanal industrialism. Every bell sold to a gallery in New York was another brick in the wall of the desert utopia. But the bells were more than just money. They were a sensory metaphor. Soleri believed that a city should have a voice. The wind, channeled through the concrete apses, would catch the bells and create a constant, haunting melody. It was a reminder to the residents that they were living in a musical instrument. The heat of the furnace, the smell of scorched sand, and the chime of the bronze, this was the raw, tactile reality of 1971. Chapter 7: The Passive Solar Symphony, Architecture as a Machine. In 1971, sustainability wasn't a buzzword. It was a survival strategy. Arcosanti Phase 1 was designed to be a machine that lived on the sun. This is most evident in the apse. These massive half-domes are not just for aesthetics, they are high-performance solar collectors. The geometry is precise. In the winter, when the sun is low on the horizon, the open face of the apse swallows the sunlight. The concrete floors and walls act as a thermal mass, absorbing the heat during the day and radiating it back into the living spaces during the cold desert night. In the summer, when the sun is high and lethal, the brow of the apse provides deep, cool shade. No air conditioning. No massive heating bills. Just the orientation of the earth and the sun. By 1971, Soleri had proven that we didn't need fossil fuels to stay comfortable, we just needed better geometry. The apse was a breathable structure. It functioned like a lung, drawing in the cool canyon air and pushing out the heat. It was a lesson in humility. It showed that if we stop fighting the environment and start dancing with it, the desert becomes our ally instead of our enemy. Chapter 8, The Silt-Casters, The Human Cost of Utopia. Who were the people who actually built Phase 1? They weren't high-priced contractors. They were the Silt-Casters. They were students, drifters, and dreamers who paid for the privilege of manual labor. Life in 1971 Arcosanti was brutal and beautiful. There were no luxuries. The volunteers lived in tents or small concrete cubicles. They woke up before the sun to beat the Arizona heat. They spent 10 hours a day hauling buckets of silt and mixing concrete by hand. The hierarchy was flat, and the work was shared. But there was a dark side to this intimacy. With no private cars and no sprawling backyards, there was nowhere to hide. You ate every meal with your coworkers. You slept within earshot of your neighbors. This was the social arcology experiment. It forced a level of human connection that most modern people find terrifying. It was a pressure cooker for the soul. Many left, unable to handle the intensity. But those who stayed felt they were part of something cosmic. They weren't just building a city, they were building a new type of human relationship, one based on mutual reliance rather than isolated consumption. Chapter 9, The Global Echo, A Message to a Choking Planet. By the end of 1971, the word was out. The New York Times, Newsweek, and Architectural Forum all sent reporters to this dusty mesa. Why? Because the world was starting to choke. The 1970s energy crisis was just around the corner. Smog in Los Angeles was becoming a health hazard. The American dream was starting to look like a nightmare of traffic jams and oil spills. Arcosanti was the counter-narrative. It was the anti-suburb. The media didn't just see buildings, they saw a prophecy. The completion of Phase 1 was a signal flare. It told the world that there was another way to exist on this planet. It wasn't about returning to the Stone Age, it was about moving into a high-tech Stone Age. Soleri became a celebrity of the counterculture. He was the architect who dared to say no to the car. In 1971, Arcosanti wasn't just a place in Arizona, it was a mental space. It was the proof that the ecological movement could be more than just protests and posters, it could be concrete and steel. It could be a home. As the sun set on 1971, the message from the Mesa was clear: the future is not a place we go, it is a place we build. Chapter 10, The Slow Build, Life in the Liminal Space. After the dust of 1971 settled, a strange reality set in. The grand blueprints called for a city of thousands. But the city didn't explode in growth. It breathed. It grew slowly, like a desert lichen. This is the era of the liminal space. Throughout the 80s and 90s, Arcosanti became a pilgrimage site. The buildings of Phase 1 began to weather. The concrete took on a patina of age. It started to look less like a new city and more like an ancient ruin that had just been discovered. This was intentional. Soleri didn't want a shiny future. He wanted an enduring one. In this chapter of the story, we see the tension between a living city and a museum. Residents lived in the 1971 apses while tourists walked past their windows. Imagine cooking dinner while a busload of architecture students from Tokyo stares at your kitchen. This was the price of living in a laboratory. You weren't just a resident, you were a specimen of a new way of life. It was a social experiment that tested the limits of privacy and the strength of the collective soul. Chapter 11: The Passing of the Prophet, Soleri's Legacy. In 2013, the desert fell silent for a moment. Paolo Soleri passed away at the age of 93. He died in the very city he had dreamed into existence. But he didn't leave behind a finished product. He left behind a process. Soleri's death forced Arcosanti to face its own mortality. Was it just a cult of personality? Or was arcology a viable science? Without the prophet of the Mesa to guide the Silt-Casting, the community had to find its own voice. The 1971 structures became sacred ground. They were the foundation. But as the 21st century rolled in, the challenges shifted. The bells were still ringing, but the world outside was changing faster than the concrete could dry. The legacy of 1971 wasn't just in the buildings. It was in the thousands of alumni who had spent a summer there. They took the Arcosanti mindset into the world. They designed the eco-friendly rooftops of Brooklyn. They built the walkable corridors of Copenhagen. The seed of 1971 was blooming in gardens it never intended to plant. Chapter 12: Arcosanti 2026, The Mars on Earth. Here we are today. 2026, the world is grappling with extreme heat, rising sea levels, and the collapse of the traditional office and suburb model. Suddenly, the 1971 experiment looks like a survival manual. Space agencies are now looking at Arcosanti. If we ever go to Mars, we won't build sprawling suburbs. We will build arcologies. We will build dense, three-dimensional, self-sustaining organisms. The urban laboratory in the Arizona desert is the closest thing we have to a moon base. The complexity-miniaturization theory is no longer a fringe philosophy. It is a digital reality. Our phones are arcologies of data. Our lives are becoming more compressed and more connected. Arcosanti Phase 1 was that alpha build of a lifestyle that is now becoming mandatory. As we face the climate reality of the mid-2020s, the desert city reminds us that we have the tools. We have the silt. We have the sun. We just need the audacity to pour the concrete. Chapter 13: The Final Signal, Closing the Loop. As we close this episode of Synapse Daily, let's go back to that sunset in 1971. The volunteers are tired. Their hands are stained with red Arizona dust. They are looking at the first completed apps. They don't know if the city will ever be finished. They don't know if the world will listen. But they built it anyway. Arcosanti is a reminder that the most dangerous thing in the world is a lack of imagination. It is a reminder that our cities are not given to us, they are made by us. Every brick, every road, every car-free path is a choice. In 1971, a group of people chose to say, there is another way. Whether Arcosanti ever reaches 5,000 people doesn't matter. What matters is that it exists. It stands as a concrete ghost in the desert, haunting our suburban dreams. It asks us, why are you still driving? Why are you still hiding? Why haven't you started building your own version of the future? Thank you for joining us on this journey through the silt and the sun. This has been Synapse Daily. If you felt the desert wind in your hair today, if you heard the chime of the bronze bells, then our work is done. Until next time, keep your eyes on the horizon and your hands in the earth. The future is waiting for you to cast it.